Welcome back to College Football Addiction. Vandy, Alabama, the game of the week. I don't know that we would have picked that early in the year, but I do think people have been eyeing this. We had Chris Lee from Vandy 247 on with us. Man, again, not sure. People have been eyeing this since what happened last year. I don't know that anybody was going to say, yeah, this is undeniably the game of the week. I know there's a big one in Tallahassee too.
Yeah.
But pretty exciting for both Vandy and Alabama right now.
Yeah, and let's go back a year ago, okay? And it was probably the upset that was the biggest upset in college football, got everybody's attention for all the reasons you know. And then if you'd said, okay, fast forward a year, Vanderbilt's going to be under a 10-point underdog in Tuscaloosa in the rematch. And oh, by the way, they'll be undefeated and they'll have Diego Pavia. Like the first part of that was pretty shocking, but knowing like the 11 months forward from that is maybe just as shocking.
Yeah, the fact they got him back. I mean, listen, going and handling business the way they have. Like, I understand the brand, and we'll talk more about the game in just a sec. But like from a big picture, if there was any other logo in the SEC on the side of Vandy's helmets, there's no way they'd be ranked. Is it 18th right now, 19th, somewhere in there? And not that that matters so much in early October, as it's October 1st when we record this, but what they've done has been incredibly impressive. And again, I think there is some brand bias there. If there was a G on the side of that helmet or a tiger on the side of that helmet, any one of the million tigers that's in the conference, I do think that they would be ranked much higher. I think this would be a top 10 matchup. And I think, it speaks to really how impressive Vandy has been this year.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's face it. This might be the best team they've had literally in 100 years. And if you're, because I'm with you, like I've asked the same thing. If you took the name off the jersey and just watched the film, like what would you do with them? Because nobody's come within 20 points of them yet, other than Utah State, which was exactly 20, right? And and that includes 2 Power 5 road games.
Yeah.
And maybe South Carolina, Virginia Tech aren't what we thought, or maybe Vanderbilt just made them both look that bad. I don't know. The season will play out, but yeah, I mean, I guess. Look, if you say, "Hey, this Vandy team's a top 10 team," and it falls apart, which it could fall apart on a lot of teams in this era of college football, then you look like an idiot, right? So I kind of get it, but yeah, I mean, the eye test so far they've looked fantastic.
So looking at Alabama this weekend, they obviously are coming off of a huge win, and their season has been ups and downs. Started kind of low with their trip to Tallahassee, took care of business against two teams that are much inferior to them, and then a very impressive road win in Athens to end Kirby's streak there. I do wonder how difficult it is for them to get up. And I know that they'll remember last year, and I understand that all the talk is, oh, can Vandy do it again and all these things. But I do wonder if there's a little bit of a difficulty in getting up just 7 days later after an insanely emotional and insanely hyped game that they just had.
Yeah, and pardon the background noise. My dog apparently has a strong opinion on this.
Hey, maybe you don't like what I was saying.
Yeah. I mean, I've wondered that too. Like, okay, you can say, okay, they beat us last year, whatever. You're probably, if you're Alabama, there's a little bit of you that thinks, hey, they're in our yard. We've gotten ourselves right since Florida State. On the other hand, if you're watching the film, and especially the way they are playing on line of scrimmage, again, maybe you can dismiss it by saying the teams they are playing aren't very good. But I would think that would get people's attention. Now, here's the weird thing. I think normally in a spot like this for Vanderbilt, if you're playing Alabama, it's going to be like, okay, you've got to hope that Alabama has a letdown and maybe brings its C- or D game to have a chance and catch all the breaks.
Alabama fans, if you are watching this preview of the Vanderbilt Alabama game, make sure you do me a favor and stock up at alumnihall.com for the largest and best selection of game day apparel. Make sure that you're checking out Alumni Hall. They've got everything you're looking for, everything you may need. If you're a fan of another college football team, they may have yours as well. Go on their website, alumnihall.com. Go visit them in store and let them take care of 15% of your order by giving them the code CFA15. We appreciate Alumni Hall. We hope that you're checking them out. I know you're buying gear for your teams out there, make sure that you're saving some money with our code at Alumni Hall, in person or online.
And look, they are going to probably have to come out ahead in the turnover battle. Alabama hasn't turned it over. They can't play a clunker of a game. But I don't think they have to show up and just have Alabama be off their game and undisciplined. I think this team might actually be good enough to go toe to toe with Alabama with both teams playing a decent game, and it comes down to the final minutes.
Yeah, as evidenced by the fact that Bama won the turnover battle in Tallahassee. I mean, it was 1-0,
Yeah.
so it's not like they were an insane amount one or the other. And they just physically got pushed around and bullied by a team
Yeah.
that many would say was athletically, talent-wise inferior to them. I'm a Florida State guy. If you can't,
Yeah.
like, I have no problem admitting that a lesser on paper team in Florida State still pushed them around. I do wonder that, though. Obviously, we'll talk about Pavia, and he gets all of the hype and all of the accolade and all the mentions and all that stuff, which very deserved.
Yeah.
The battle in the trenches. Alabama's offense and defensive line looked completely different week 5, I guess. The buys throw me off, versus week 1 in Tallahassee. Now they get Tim Keenan back, which is a big deal last week, and he is a monster. Also got a guard back by the time we got to that 5th game, got Miller back as well. But just the thoughts on the matchups in the trenches in this, or maybe how Vanderbilt can scheme around what may be an advantage for Alabama.
I was on an Alabama podcast last night, and the question was asked, who has the advantage on the lines of scrimmage? And I just thought for a minute, first of all, given the history of these two programs, it's kind of hard to believe that's a serious question. And then watching them, you're like, okay, this is a serious question, because let's look at Alabama. You come in, you've got Caden Proctor, who's a potential top 10 pick as a left tackle. The results have been mixed. You got Parker Brailsford, who's an All-American center. You got some other guys in between who are pretty good players. And look, I'll guarantee you, whatever 5 starters Bama rolls out there, when you go back and look at recruiting rankings, they're all going to be higher than the 5 Vanderbilt rolls out there. And defensive line too, getting Keenan back for them is going to help. And they've got some other playmakers up there. Vanderbilts are not guys that people know, but they were, I think, according to Phil Steele, either the oldest or most experienced team in the country coming in. And I kept saying, I think that's going to matter. It usually matters. Now we'll see how much it matters, because continuity is a part of that. A lot of those guys are new, but they're starting offensive linemen are either all 5 of them are all graduate students, or maybe 4 and 1 senior. I can't remember now. But point is, they're old. And 4 of those guys were guys they brought in the portal for those starters. And one of them was a guy that was a left tackle they moved inside to guard, where he's been a better fit. And they've got a guy at center named Jordan White that I think by the end of the season, if he's not getting like first team All-American consideration, maybe people aren't doing their homework. Yeah. So the point is, and on the defensive line, like Vanderbilt's played 14 guys on the defensive line, I think, against Virginia Tech. Like, I don't know that that's ever been a thing. And so are they the guys that are going to go first round like Alabama's? Probably not. But what we've seen in college football is that doesn't always matter. It's a new world where you've got guys that are 24 playing against guys who are, 19 and 20 sometimes. And sometimes that matters. We don't have enough of a history to know what that looks like. But I think, and you watch the way Vanderbilt's got a pass rush, and you watch the way they have pushed people around in the trenches when they've got the ball and the lanes they open, particularly in the A gaps to run in. And it is a way different team. Like if you're going off last year's team and looking, I think they are much, much better than they were a year ago.
Obviously, Pavia gets all the recognition, all the fame. You talk to me, suddenly everybody wants to talk Vandy football, and I know you're doing a bunch of these back to back. What are other names that people should look out for? Again, I'll take the main one away, but what are other names that people should look out for on this Vanderbilt offense? Playmakers, weapons, X factors, things like that.
Yeah, well, everybody knows Diego Pavia, and most people know Eli Stowers, who's their All-American tight end, who's fantastic. But I think the biggest thing, I mean, the line of scrimmage is the biggest place where they're better. We just went over that, but they got some playmakers all of a sudden. Trey Richardson is a JUCO kid who's 10'3", 10'6" meter guy, and he's been fantastic. And that gives them an element of speed and game breaking they didn't have a year ago. They've got Martell Height, defensive back, who's playing some both ways. Again, a potential take the guy off the top defense. And even though he hasn't done a lot, just the threat of his speed makes defenses play you differently. They got Junior Sherrill, who's not a burner, but he's really improved. He's a good route runner, had 3 touchdowns in the first half last week. And they've got a running back in Cedric Alexander, who's a tremendous blocker and also about as good of a pass catching running back as you'll find. And you throw that in with Pavia and his mobility, like that's a lot that you've got to watch. That's not even getting into the fact that they throw a different look and a different play at you, every drive. And so it's just the whole thing together is just a headache to contain. But it's very much helped them that they've found guys in the receiving room that are playing at a level that they didn't have a year ago.
On Pavia specifically, we saw Bama struggle some, no, mightily with a running quarterback, a guy that is very, very mobile in Tommy Castellanos, and that's kind of been that's not fair to just discredit Bama for that because it is tough for everybody to deal with a running quarterback. Like that, just extra element is very difficult. I mean, it goes without saying maybe that he will likely be the focal point again, and if they're going to win this thing, it probably has a lot to do with what he's able to create both through the air and with his legs.
Yeah, and look, I would say it's a double edged sword with him, right? Because I think if Vanderbilt is going to get where it's going to get to, and I think college football playoff is on the table, especially if they win Saturday. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but you look at the analytical models, and they've got them right there, pretty much in every remaining game. I mean, Alabama is going to be the game where they're probably the biggest underdog, and that's now under 10 points. But I don't know. Look, I haven't studied it and gone over it, but I can't imagine anybody who's having a better year than he is and has a more of an impact on his team than Diego Pavia.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, they've got to get him through the season because, like, if he gets hurt, then that discussion about playoff is over. I just don't think they've got the horses outside him, at backup quarterback especially to do it. But at the same time, like every time the ball is in his hands, he is making plays, including in the running game. And again, some of that is having guys downfield that you've got to respect, and some of that is, the line. But like every time he's had an opportunity to make a play this year, pretty much he's done it. And so, like your upside is greater every time the ball is in his hands making a play, but your risk of your season going bad is also greater every time he's exposed to a hit. And how they navigate the math on that going forward is going to be interesting. But I would expect in a game like Alabama, that's one where higher usage, I would think, is likely on the table, especially because of what you saw in the FSU game.
Being in Nashville, I can't help but think of the Kenny Rogers Gambler song when when you talk about that and knowing when to roll them out there and when to call it a day and not go all in and crash out and burn. So now I'm going to be singing that for the rest of the day. What is the area that Alabama, outside of maybe just the logo on their helmet, which maybe some of those demons got erased last year, but what's the biggest concern or maybe the biggest matchup problem that worries you from the Vandy perspective when you look at Alabama?
I think it's the passing game. Ty Simpson has really played well, especially since the Florida State game. And a lot of people say like they had much bigger issues than Ty Simpson in that one. And so, which I think was true. They've been really impressive since that game. No, they haven't played anybody as good as Vanderbilt. So there's that. But I think one thing that I've seen is that I've kind of circled as a thing I'm watching is like Utah State made some plays downfield against him last week. Now, some of that is what Utah State does. I think they're top 5 or 10 in the country. They were coming in terms of like explosive plays over 30, 40, 50 yards. I think in all the categories, they had generated a lot of those, and that's kind of part of what they were playing. That's a pretty good offense with a mobile quarterback. But they, downfield one-on-one coverage last week, they got beat a lot of times in one-on-one battles. Now, look, some of those were, third stringers late in games, but some of them were not. And you watch Alabama, it's got Ryan Williams, it's got Jeremy Bernard, it's got the Horton kid. I mean, Alabama's always going to have athletes, and you've got a quarterback who's really cooking right now. They haven't turned it over all season. You give them a little window to make throws downfield to a Williams and get him open. Now, the pass rush may be able to close the gap and cut those windows down. And I think they were probably more vanilla against Utah State and Georgia State than they, that they could afford to do that. So maybe they bring some pressures, and that gives some teams some problems. But That's my concern is you give Simpson some time to find guys downfield, and I think that's going to be a problem for Vanderbilt potentially.
Yeah, Simpson, I agree with you on that. Like, I don't think he was the reason they lost that first game. I thought he was really good. And, you know, all things considered, um, when they were able to move his feet, that was a big deal. When he was under any kind of pressure or just not throwing in rhythm, I mean, you see how elite he's been since then. Florida State was
Yeah,
able to bring kind of chaotic pressure. He got out of a lot of it. He's more mobile than maybe people expected him to be. But just his passing down the field wasn't great. And Bama's wide receivers helped out a little bit too with, I don't know, like 5 drops in that game, which kind of changed
yeah.
certain drives. So if you're Vandy, you can hope for some of that as well, I guess. What about the other way? I'll ask this and then we'll wrap up. But what about where does Vandy maybe have, and it might just be Pavia, but where do they have the best advantage in this matchup?
Oh boy. Yeah, special teams. We don't talk about that a lot, but they are probably top 5 in the country in special teams. I think they're
Hmm.
3 at SP plus. Like their field goal kicker, Brock Taylor, has not missed a field goal, I think, in almost a year. Now they have
Hmm.
missed a couple extra points. So that's it's not these perfect, and some of that's probably not on him. They're just very good across the board there. I think that the running game, you saw the trouble Alabama had. I think Diego Pavia is going to give anybody trouble. But those are the two things. Like third downs, you can have everything covered, and it's 3rd and 8, and you think you've got him, and then he slide steps you and kind of wiggles between some guys, and next thing you know, he's got 13 yards when you need 8. And your defense is out on the field for several more plays. I think those are the two things that where Vanderbilt can really potentially have an advantage.
Feels like the confidence has to be sky high. I'm sure that it's a nice place for Lee to be in. You know, you wouldn't normally say that it's a good place to be in going into Tuscaloosa ever if you're any
Yeah,
team, and then especially if you're Vandy historically. But confidence has to be sky high. But you can not only play up the confidence of how they've started this year, how they played last year in this matchup, and then really throughout most of the year. And at the same time, be able to play up the underdog role. Like you kind of get, best of both
yeah,
worlds in that situation if you're Vandy, right? Everything to
yeah.
win, nothing to lose. All the pressure's on Bama because of that loss in week 1. So I do think that makes for an interesting kind of dynamic. All right, I can't let you go this far without getting a score from you. I don't know
Yeah.
if you've done one or not for the site, but what's your lean in this one?
I'm thinking a high scoring game, maybe a 38-31 Alabama type of game, but it would shock me if Vanderbilt went in there and won. No, I think they're confident, they believe it. And by the way, they've been in 2 environments in Blacksburg and in Columbia, South Carolina, that are known for that environment. In season home openers for both teams, and handled those pretty well. I guess it wasn't Carolina's opener, but it was their opener in terms of Power 4 teams. So they're ready for the stage, and I think if they lose, it'll just be because Alabama was better, which is extremely possible because I think Alabama is a potential national title contender.
Yeah, for sure. They're rolling now. Tell people where they can find your work, where they can follow you, where you write, and all the things you do, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Vandy 24/7 is all the Vanderbilt coverage. Southeastern 16, I run a YouTube channel covering SEC baseball, basketball, and football, and we cover that wall to wall. I think people enjoy that too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes with us. Rest up for a fun weekend, man. I
Yeah,
appreciate you a ton.
anytime. Thank you so much.
We also want to shout out Sleeper at the end of this video. We will play the more or less game on the Power 2 live every Wednesday, so make sure you have the Sleeper app downloaded. We always appreciate them for their support. Check out the Sleeper app. Use our code CFA as well when you download.